Every year in my department, each faculty sits down with the chairman and goes over their annual accomplishments, and each year I feel nervous. I never feel like I've accomplished enough. It's just my personality. But this year I was going to be meeting a new chairman. He was an MD, PhD, he was well published, and so I was a little more nervous than usual. I was nervous, but I was also very frustrated. And the source of my frustration came in the fact that I have been a surgeon in academic medicine for the past 20 years at Harvard. I, as such, am a triple threat. I see patients, I do research, and I teach trainees. But about 3 years ago, I decided to migrate my research interests away from fixing really small airways in kids to fixing the ear. And in doing so, I realized as a mid-career surgeon that I am a lot more busy now than I used to be. I don't have time to get to the lab, and as such, I just don't have the same academic output that I had before. I'm busier than ever and don't have anything to show for it. I have frustration, but also more anxiety about this meeting. And so the meeting began simply enough. He was very pleasant. Then he started to ask me flat down, got right down to business, and he said, "So what do you do with your time?" And I responded, "Well, in addition to my surgery, I have a small business on the side. Every morning I get up at 4 a.m. I have 2 full-time employees. I have a bunch of part-time employees. I manage that business. I manage their payroll, their schedules, their taxes, their grievances. And then I move on to business, the budget, and the inventory. And by 7 a.m., I'm back in the hospital. And after hours, this business takes a bit of time as well." And I could see across the desk he was looking at me with this look of sort of mild bewilderment and yet some respect. And he stopped and he asked me, he said, "Well, do you mind if I ask what you do with this business? What's your business?" And I said, "I manage my household." I was not quite bold enough to say that I was the mother of 3 children for fear I would be dismissed as a mommy. I felt like I was pushing the envelope enough. But his response surprised me and confirmed the importance of sharing my story. He was not dismissive, but rather he acknowledged me in a way that made me feel understood. And since that time, he's never given me a hard time about the pace of my academic progress, and he's actually championed me in a number of ways. And from his response, I realized that if I can just reframe my domestic role in a way that those who don't do that type of work can understand, then they can appreciate it better. My story of balancing my professional work and my domestic work is not unique. Most working mothers and some fathers feel this constant tension. The workplaces vary, but the vulnerability remains the same, and we all share in the common experience of slowing down our compensated work in order to be an effective parent and to run a household. But the issue is that there's very little or no value attached to domestic work. It doesn't increase our stock prices, it doesn't increase our GDP, and in my case, it doesn't increase my university's standing amongst other academic institutions. In fact, it's seen as a distraction. But I want to argue this point and instead suggest that the role of parenting and running a household actually leads to better employees, managers, and leaders. In fact, parenting is a transformative experience that when you apply it to the workplace, actually makes for a much more cohesive and productive experience. So to argue this point, to convince you of this, I'm going to cover 3 topics. First, I'm going to cover the neurobiology of the parenting brain. I'm going to go on to discuss whether these neurobiologic changes lead to better leadership skills. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how society can better embrace primary caregivers and then benefit from primary caregivers in a leadership position. So mothers, we all think that we lose our brain function with childbirth, right? How many times have you heard the term mommy brain, right? It's a common one. Or you walk into a room to go get something, and by the time you've gotten into the room, you've already forgotten what you went in there for, right? Term I call rumentia. We all think brain function gets worse with pregnancy. But research on the maternal rat in the 1990s has shown exactly the opposite, that brain centers responsible for memory, boldness, efficiency, spatial learning are all markedly increased with pregnancy, and then much more so after delivery of the pups. Mother rats will have litters of 12 to 14, and the mother knows what's going on with every single pup. Mother rats are better able to run a maze to find food than do their non-pup-bearing counterparts, and they show marked increases in spatial learning and foraging behaviors. Similar brain enhancements are found in humans when pregnant women's brains are imaged using MRI. Same brain centers are enlarged, same brain centers are found to be persistently enlarged long after delivery. So, interestingly, men can also have these brain changes, but only when they enter primary caregiving in a full-time role. So in the end, a stay-at-home parent's brain does not atrophy, but it rather grows in a way that allows them to think more broadly and enhances their mental agility in order to care for their young. Think about that. Research shows our brains change with parenting. And think about, how are you different as a parent? How are those around you that you know, how are they different as a parent? I know I'm very different as a parent. But do these neurologic changes actually translate into better leadership skills? Today's organizations have become so complex, including geographically diverse, that in order to be a top performer, you have to be able to bring together all the moving parts. You need an inclusive and communicative style of pulling it all together. Gone are the days of command and control leadership. Research shows that in order to be a top performer, you not only have to have a strategic vision and a drive for success, but you also have to have the skill set to bring it all together. And who does this type of work well? In 2012, two gentlemen, Jack Zinger and Joseph Folkman, published a study in the Harvard Business Review, and they looked at what they defined as 16 top competency scores of top-performing CEOs. And of those top 16 competencies, they took those 16 and they looked over gender, men and women, and then they decided, well, both can lead well. Men and women can lead well. But women scored higher in a full 12 of those 16 top competencies. And they concluded their paper by saying, well, why are we not fully engaging and employing exemplary women leaders? And you may think, well, maybe these women didn't have children. In 2014, Fortune magazine published their Fortune 500 list of companies, and of those 500 well-performing companies, there were 24 female executives, and of those 24 female executives, almost all were mothers, way above the national average. I have a good friend from long ago who has become a department chairwoman, and she took over this department in a time when it was very fragmented and separated into little fiefdoms. And she has since pulled this department together and made these wonderful cohesive platforms for research. And I asked her what she thought was her best prep for becoming a chairperson. And she laughed. She said, it wasn't going back and getting an MBA. It was really being the mother of 3 children. She treats her faculty very similar to the way that she treats her kids. She sat down with them, assessed their needs, put supports in place, and then sometimes would have to outline consequences, a skill set she had finely tuned by having 3 teenagers. So business research shows that primary caregivers offer a different and productive leadership style. And ask yourself, those of you who've had a boss who is also a parent, what's different about their leadership styles? Brains change, and in our institutions, leaders change. But yet the long-held definition of the trajectory to success has still yet to change. My third point, need for societal change. In any capitalist society, organizations are always faced with the dilemma of how to maintain forward momentum of this organization when a primary caregiver fills a critical position, and yet that primary caregiver is busy taking care of a family. And there's been lots of great work done on reducing the caregiver's load. There's job sharing, there's flex time. Even in my world, publish or perish has really slowed down. But where we fall short is that when a caregiver is ready to return to a higher level of work output in the compensated arena, that person is either not hired well below their skill set, or passed over for promotion. There's very little chance that those of us who've taken off time to be caregivers will be considered for leadership positions. we simply perpetuate the problem of fewer caregivers and management, leads to worse conditions for all caregivers, but it also squanders a valuable resource. I want to share a story about my mother, in part because it's a story of a success, but it's also a call to action, since so many of the challenges that she faced when she was younger are still yet present today. So my mother, she started in graduate school in biochemistry in the 50s. She went all the way through the program, almost till the very end, at which point she got married and she had first of 3 kids, my older brother. And like most women of her era, she really took responsibility for raising those children, and the 2 to follow, myself and my younger brother. And as such, she was never able to finish her PhD. She tried. She went back to academia. She faced the typical discrimination of her era. She was told, "We do not take mothers in graduate school." So she went to industry, and she was hired in industry, but she was hired way below her skill set. And as her children got older and became more independent, she was able to rise through the ranks of her firm, so that in the end, she led a team of scientists who together, they developed safe technology to give back critical proteins to patients who were deficient in clotting factors and antibodies. It was a huge financial benefit for her firm, but it was also a monumental benefit for society. And consider if she had been valued earlier in her career as a scientist while also a caregiver, and imagine where society would be now if she had had more time to develop products and the science to go with it. Back to that conversation about my side business in my annual review. My boss understood and valued that, mommy brain. My boss understood and valued that I had a skill set to offer the institution that was probably made better by my role as a mother. He was able to recognize the skill set and tap that skill set for what it was worth. My impression of him is that he's a thoughtful and considerate person, able to look across the desk and value the person, the whole person sitting across from him. Already ahead of his time, my generation has made progress. But imagine if this were the norm across the national landscape. My hope is that one day, you and I will be able to have our children start their careers and families in a position of harmony instead of having to focus on one or the other. And if they should become caregivers, whether they fully stop their compensated work or they just markedly slow it down, that they be valued and given credit for that time when they re-enter the workplace. We need to take advantage of the parents in our midst and treat time spent as a caregiver not as a break in our work, but as time spent obtaining an extremely valuable skill set. I want the day to come that I can put primary caregiver on my resume and it counts for something. Maybe you could start with putting it on your LinkedIn profile. And as society embraces primary caregivers and the multiple trajectories to success, we will find that our businesses, our academic institutions, and our families will all benefit and prosper as one. And that's an idea worth sharing. Thank you.